Ex-prisoners. What's the saddest thing you've ever seen in prison? As a kid, I went to juvie, kid jail, for accidentally setting some woods on fire. Bonfire out of control situation. And my cellmate was only a few years older than me. He was a super nice, laid-back guy. We got along great, and even sort of became friends while there. I was just a kid, so I didn't really ask any questions about different colors of jumpsuits and people's reasons for being there. The day I got out, I found out he was in there for murder. Apparently, he got really tired of his stepdad physically abusing him, and he killed him. I never really knew all of the details, but I can tell you that when talking to him, he seemed like a good kid at heart. Had things and people that he cared about, things he wanted to do, interests, etc. The guards obviously must have known, but they were always super nice to him, noticeably so, even more so than other inmates. I always wondered what happened to him. No, I don't know his name, and have not tried to find him because of that. This took place in Florida during severe drought, and we were already fighting a bunch of fires intentionally set by arsonists. They definitely took it pretty serious. Two kids that I thought were my friends pinned the whole thing on me. I absolutely learned my lesson, lol. He was very cool, polite, and got along with everybody. I couldn't have imagined it being enjoyable for him, but I only knew him that brief period. Story 2. A 57-year-old man on a life sentence on spice, synthetic psychoactive cannabinoids, crawling around on the floor screaming because he can see his dead mother towering over him, looking at him in disgust. Not a pleasant thing to see. Edit. Especially when you're stuck in a cell with him. Edit 2. Doing the same drug I've mentioned above, a 22-year-old man ended up flooding his cell, setting it on fire, and killing himself whilst on the drug, 2 months before finishing his sentence. Another is where a guy sliced his effing dick in half, and again set fire to his cell because the drug made him think erections are evil. So yeah, stay away from spice. Story 3. When I was young, juvie, I was 15 or 16 at the time. Most of us were older teens. 11-year-old kid was brought in for throwing rocks at one of his teacher's homes. Had an older fat guard who worked there. These were generally civilian guards, given we were juveniles. Well, this guy, named Travis, started being weird with the kid. At first, was like any other 11-year-old. Happy-go-lucky. Travis got really handsy with him. At mealtimes, he was like actively rubbing on him. We all saw it. It was a lockdown facility, so we weren't let out of our cells much either, but we all witnessed it. Guy was like rubbing his back, touching his leg. Within a few days, kid's whole attitude changed. We all knew Travis was sexually abusing him, even though we couldn't prove it. Story 4. I knew a guy who was never in trouble in his life. He was working in the automotive industry in Michigan and lost his job. He fell behind with child support payments and ended up doing time in jail. His very first night, his two cellmates got into an argument because one of them couldn't find his bear claw snack. They finally stopped arguing and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, he was woken up by the guy beating the guy he accused of theft. He literally beat the guy to death. Apparently, he had gotten a hold of some kind of pole or stick. The entire cell was just completely covered in blood. They end up finding out that the guy he accused of stealing didn't steal it after all. I'll never forget the fear and look in the guy's eyes when he told me what happened. Story 5. I went to county for about a week in the middle of nowhere, Kansas on a drug charge. I was 19 years old, scared crapless. It was a room with about 4 communal picnic benches and 2 rooms on either side with about 6 bunks in them. I noticed one was full, and the other had just one guy in there. So, not understanding the situation at all, went over to the empty bunks and a guy grabbed my shoulder and just gave me a hard look that said, "No," but without saying a word. Then I noticed the other prisoners were camped out in corners on their mattress. I did the same. Found out quickly that the solo guy was in for crime against a child. I've never heard such as an ass whooping. More? That night. I just covered my ears and stared at the wall. How did I get here? And the sobbing and pleading. I was bonded out the next day. Edit. A couple people have asked. This was in 1992, my spring break of college freshman year. I was driving to visit a friend of mine in Wichita. I never had to serve time. First offense, good lawyer, college kid, etc. I got extremely lucky. Story 6. Hanging out one day in the law library. All of a sudden, some kid who was fresh came in, minding his own business, and just started reading something. One of my boys, who was also in there, mind you, I'd been locked up for over a year at this point with this dude. He was chill and in there for coke dealing. Got up. walked over to the younger kid and beat the living F out of him. Like, not just knocked him out. I'm saying literally beat the life out of him. Blood flying everywhere. The kid was on the ground and the dude just kept smashing his face in. It was like literally caved in. I got up and just stepped back and watched so I wouldn't get jumped by the COs when they came in. They literally dragged this lifeless kid away and cuffed the dude I knew. I saw him once more before I got out, and I asked him what the F happened that day. All he said was, quote, "I felt like effing somebody up." Needless to say, I've had serious trust issues since then, and since being locked up in general. Seeing that literal 18-year-old get beat to death in front of me was pretty effed. Yo, this is pretty wild. Like, I know that prison fights break out all the time, and, it's not like we should be doing people in jail any favors, but for someone to literally just be able to walk up and beat someone to death like that in prison is pretty wild. Like, why is there no recourse to stop that from happening? Anyway, let's move on to story 7. 17-year-old kid was in my block. His name was Israel. He had been kicked out of his grandma's house a few months prior for doing drugs, so he was living on the streets. He got picked up for package theft. He was only in for 30 days, but he was enjoying every minute of it. Because he was young and a generally good dude, people looked out for him. I taught him how to play spades. At the end of the 30 days, he didn't want to get out. He didn't want to go back to life on the street with no food. He was planning on doing something to get himself back in there, but I tried convincing him that's not where he wanted to be. I told him he needed to go talk to his grandma, quit doing drugs, and try to get a job to help her pay bills and help him out of trouble so he could get his own place sometime soon. He heard me, but I doubt he was listening. If I had to guess, he probably got himself locked up again, but I sure hope not. Story 8. I knew a guy who was very kind and in prison for just a parole violation because he stole something. He was a homeless guy. He was a bit goofy and had schizophrenia or something, but a really nice guy. Anyway, he got sent to Seg for some reason, and the guards ended up beating him to death in there. I believe the guards who did it are in prison themselves now. Can't believe that happened. R.I.P. Larry. Story 9. I was working on Servery, so I was out of my cell every day, all day. One day, I was told by the screw to check on the cells on the ground floor. I opened one of the door flaps, and this guy, he was standing in the middle of the room, with shirt off, crying, then proceeded to slash both his wrists. Called help. He made it, but not long after, he hung himself. Story 10. Was in with someone, let's call him Carlos, was up for review serving a dime, and he got a new roomie who tried to clap his cheeks. Carlos had no choice but to stick him, and he added another 5 years to his term when he was likely going to be free that year. From what we understand, he did tell the guards and review board that he was defending himself from being sexually assaulted, but not sure what the outcome was other than he added more time. Edit. Update. Wow, didn't realize how many likes this got. Thank you all. I just asked my boy, who stayed in the same block with Carlos, about how his release date, and Carlos did in fact get out on time in 2017. The new roommate had a reputation, and many other DAs in his paperwork about other essays in prison, which came into play for his review. Edit. Update. I was serving 3 to 5 for conspiracy to fraud and aggravated assault 3. Ended up serving 2 years in Arizona for good behavior and participation. I didn't do it. Lawyer effed me. Shawshank Redemption. Story 11. A guy we worked out with found out his dad killed his wife, mom, and their child, then killed himself. He went to his cell for a while, and after like 40 minutes, he was screaming for help. Stumbled out of his cell with his wrists all cut up, and also cut up his neck real bad too. Unfortunately, he didn't make it more than a few steps out of his cell before falling and going unresponsive. That was almost as rough as when my best friend's brother decided to blow the back of his skull off in the room next to us. Okay, I'm just assuming by blowing the back of your skull off, you had access to a gun. So again, how does that make its way into a prison cell? I've never been to jail, so it might be a lot easier done than said. But yeah, it just seems a little wild to me. Story 12. My ex-boyfriend was in jail for almost 3 years. I used to visit him every Saturday. There were lots of families there, in the visitation room. Imagine a sort of warehouse with little tables and chairs. There was this woman that would sometimes visit her husband and give him handjobs under the table. Sometimes she would sit on his lap and ride him for a while. Right next to her 2 little kids. I will never forget those kids' faces, staring at the wall, trying to ignore what their parents were doing. The guards would mostly ignore it because the guy was apparently a big-shot drug dealer and had lots of influence. It was absolutely disgusting and humiliating for those kids. My ex would scold me for staring at them with disgust. He didn't want to get in trouble with that guy. So messed up. Not as messed up as your horror stories, but it broke my heart to see kids in those situations. Story 13. Did my time from 2018 to 22. Being Asian, it's so few of us on certain yards, and I ended up being cellmates with the only other Vietnamese on the yard. He was a lifer who was never going home and took me in like a little brother. I usually get mail from family, but this one time I saw the letter and it was for him. Exciting and handing him the letter, he was in shock it was for him. As he read the letter, his face said it all, and it was clear that it wasn't a good letter. He later tells me that he reached out to his uncle to see his mom and dad's whereabouts because they're in Vietnam. His uncle told him to drop dead. How embarrassing he was to the family, brought him to the US just to F off his life, and to never contact ever again unless he's getting released. He barely spoke any English and overall was a good guy who made a grave mistake. He had a huge drug addiction that I overlooked till it got out of hand. During count time, we would have to stand up and show our ID to the COs who were making their rounds. My cellmate would tell me when he's gonna load up and shoot up the drugs. I had no problem with it because I'm no one to judge, and this is how it is in prison. As long as I know you aren't snooping through my personal belongings, respectful to the house, and not tampering with my hygiene, everything is good. But this time, as he got squared away, he didn't clean up, and I already dozed off before count time happened. 4 to 5 loud knocks, and I'm woken up for count time. I jump off the rack and notice my cellmate was literally slumped over the stool, like how you see homeless people who are strung out off heroin. COs know exactly what's going on, but would rather look the other way than typing up a 115 disciplinary report. Anyways, I look over at our table, and there it was. Gram of heroin, syringe, cotton ball, and spoon. That alone can land you up to 5 to 10 extra years in prison, plus dead time in the SHU. After that, I tried explaining to him that if he doesn't clean up his act, then I'm going to have to move out of the cell. I want to make it home, and he couldn't let go. Fast forward 2 to 3 months later. Friends on the yard are telling me how my ex-cellmate is very sad. Doesn't act the same. He had no family support, letters or phone calls, so I took him in as family, took care of him, and let him talk to my mom on the phone, for we are from the same area in Vietnamese, so he can have some sense of family. COVID-19 struck the world, and inside prison was absolutely a hellhole. Went 4 to 5 months of straight lockdown. No phone calls or mail coming in or out. No clue what's going on at all because COs are all afraid, calling off work and refusing to take the vaccination. Some were, some weren't. Long story short, man, my cellmate ended up being patient 0 and had COVID first on the yard. He was completely isolated in a different unit alone with other people who also caught the virus. Typical day in the prison compound. An alarm goes off while we're all in lockdown. Everyone thinks it's a fight breaking out in a different unit. 3 to 4 hours later, a CO comes up to my cell. I'm thinking it's a cell extraction and brace myself to get raided. He pulls me out and tells me that my ex-cellmate was found dead. He braided up the bed sheets, looped it between the AC unit, dropped to his knees, started spinning his body till the circulation cut off, and committed self-unalive. My heart broke in half and cried in the cell. Of course, some people in prison are pieces of crap and made fun of the matter. I ended up smashing this guy at our break room for making fun of my cellmate's self-unalive and ended up 6 months in the SHU along with extra time for inciting a riot. Additional year along with the dead time of 6 months. Found out that they resuscitated him back to life. He was dead for about 25 minutes and now is in a medical yard that has him on life support for the past 2 years. The state cannot pull the plug unless the family gives permission to kill off their loved ones, but they tried to get in contact with him. Too little, too late. I pray for his soul and his family's well-being till this day. Rest easy, brother. Life after death will be graceful, and may you be reunited with your family when the time calls. That's a touching story, and you can tell by the insane length of the post that this guy probably hasn't spoken about this to anyone and just needed to vent and get it all out. He's been holding it in, and I'm glad that he did. It's kind of wild. It just kind of opens your eyes to the fact that not everybody in prison is just evil and psychopathic. There are some decent human beings that just made honest mistakes, particularly when they're younger, and unfortunately have to pay the long-term consequences for that. So I commend this person for sharing the post. Good job. Story 14. Had a stint in in juvie way back during COVID. A 13-year-old girl was the only other person I could talk to since her intake day was the same as mine. Social distancing BS. Jesus, her story was intense. Long story short, she was in there because of a brutal fight with her druggy mom. She had two choices: lose her only family member to jail and have her go into foster care, or lie and take the fault so she would be the one locked up. Genuinely almost brought me to tears. She had so many cuts and bruises. Story 15. Not an ex-inmate, but an ex-CO. I had an inmate who got some bad news in the form of his mother passing right as it turned Christmas Day. It was midnight, and we wouldn't be serving chow for a good long while, and the day rooms were all clear of inmates, so it was a tad odd to have to escort a guy down to the LT's office. I was dismissed as soon as we arrived, and he was sent back alone. This guy was a troublemaker, always acting disrespectful to both us and the other inmates. When he returned, I figured I was going to have hell putting him back in. Instead, he calmly walked back to his cell, never said a word, and didn't even look around. We checked on him multiple times, and nothing happened on my shift. Found out when I came back in the next day that he had hung himself in his cell with a towel, while his cellie was at rec and the officers were busy in another wing. I remember the worst part was getting the call to escort him down, because when they called it, it had just turned from Christmas Eve to Christmas Day. So for Christmas, he got another night in prison, and he lost his mother. Story 16. Not a prisoner, but I worked in a prison for about 2 years as an admin. A lot of sad stuff happens all the time. Many times, the inmates' family visits turn out into a big shouting event, and the inmate goes back to their room feeling depressed because that was first time in months they had seen their family. There was one time where a guy was waiting for his mother and sister to visit him. The family had booked half an hour time slot, and the guy was in the waiting room, but they never turned up. I actually saw tears in his eyes as the visiting hours were over and he was told to go back. Our prison also conducts GCSE English and math classes for inmates. One of the inmates had been doing a lot of revision and preparing for his GCSEs, for almost a year, I assume. On the day of his exam, he heard that his partner had committed self-unalive, and he was mentally traumatized to sit in the exam. He lost his partner, missed his chance to appear in the exam, and lost a bit of his mind as well. There are countless small stories that I've seen, which is extremely sad. When I narrate this to people, there's very little sympathy towards them. Story 17. Just all the people with severe mental illness that shouldn't be there. And in an immigration jail, I saw a Korean die from AIDS-related issues as the jail wouldn't supply him with any medication. In the same jail, a friend ended up with multiple cancer tumors caused by lack of treatment for prostate cancer. The jail refused to bring him to the hospital for over 2 years. By the time he got the diagnosis for the prostate cancer, it had already spread to his liver, lungs, colon, and bones. Terminal. He died about 2 months after I got released. Story 18. 2 things. There was an old Italian man, transitioned from cane to wheelchair the 4 years I was there. Hunched over, palsy, half blind, had BOP inmate caretakers to watch over him. Yes, that's a thing in federal prison. It's not inhumane. It's one of the best paying jobs to have, actually. He was in his early 90s and dying from cancer. Feds would not grant compassionate leave because he'd been an important capo in the mafioso back in the late 70s. No, I don't remember his name. Then there was this guy, maybe early 30s, probably high-functioning autistic. No friends. Prison is hell if you don't have at least one person to hang with. Spent all his time listening to Catholic masses on the radio, and all his free time either walking the track or in the leisure library. Still the radio, all the time. During visitations, his mother, who came every time as far as we could figure out, would pet him. Literally pet him, stroking his arm or hair or back. You could tell it was very comforting for both of them. Kinda jealous sometimes, because that sort of contact wasn't permitted, except the guards looked the other way for this guy. We all knew he was a SO, but it wasn't that kind of place, and even if it was, even lower on that totem pole is those guys who prey on the helpless, and man, was this dude ever helpless. No one felt anything more than pity for him. Story 19. I wasn't exactly in prison. It was the county jail. I used to have a bit of a drinking problem and landed a DUI. It was a ruralish Wisconsin county, so like 90% of the inmates were drunks. One guy we had in there for his 4th OWI, but he'd been sober for 20 years. He got it because he had throat cancer and he was spaced out on his pain meds when he got pulled over. The cancer had eaten his larynx away and he had to use one of those electronic wand voice boxes to talk. There was some F-up involving the paperwork for his cancer meds, so the a-hole in charge of the block wouldn't let him have any of them for the first few days. He was throwing up all over the place, and the rest of us inmates had to take care of him and clean up his vomit. Eventually, they got his med thing figured out, and he did the rest of his time. About 2 months. 3 weeks after he got out, we saw his obituary in the paper. We also had a nurse who came around to give everybody their meds in the morning and evening who quit because the officer in charge of the jail was constantly female dogging her about being too nice to the inmates. She was a really sweet younger lady, and I think relatively fresh out of college. Basically, she thought that we were already at a low point in our lives, so we deserved some kindness. An officer didn't agree, and he started giving her a hard time about anything he could. I think the incident with the cancer guy was the last straw for her. I don't know where this mindset comes about where everybody in prison is a scummy piece of crap, when there are people out there freely walking the streets that are morally much, much, much lower than some people that are locked up in prison. That's not to say that they're all good people inherently, but it's like this nurse understands compassion and empathy for all human beings and shouldn't be shamed for that, especially not to the point of quitting her job. That just sucks. And for a man who was sick with cancer and ultimately died due to negligence from the officer, where's the accountability there? Like, come on. Story 20. I was once stood up for a family visit. My friend booked it and didn't show, so I had to wait in the holding cells whilst everyone went on their visits. After an hour, a guy from my area came back off his visit, looking visibly shaken, upset. He went on to tell me that his girlfriend and mother to his kids had just told him she had terminal cancer. Sadly, she died not too long after. This was like 12 years ago. To make matters worse, the guy's face popped up on my Facebook the other week as he was murdered. Made me think of them kids. Probably adults now, parentless. Story 21. Obligatory, not a prisoner, but I'm a CO and most things don't bother me. They can't because I have to come back every day. But one thing, we had an inmate. We'll call him Johnny. Johnny had some kind of mental disability where he never matured from 8 years old. He had the brain of an 8-year-old in the body of a 15-year-old, despite him being in his mid-20s. There's so many things that were messed up about his being here. Firstly, never should have been arrested. His bail was $50 and his parents refused to pay it, instead taking a vacation to St. Martin. Every Thursday, visitation day for his cell block, he came up to me and said, "Officer Thunderball, my parents are here. Can I go see them?" I checked with the officers in the lobby and no, they weren't here. He just thought that maybe if he showed up, then they would too. Christmas Eve, he asked me if Santa was going to still give him presents if he was in jail. Is that effed up enough? Yeah, it gets worse. So much worse. Administration decided to house him on our special needs unit. Makes sense. However, our special needs unit is mostly comprised of creepers. We put a mentally handicapped man who looks 15 and acts 8 in a unit full of creepers. Take a guess what happened. Figured it out? Take a guess how many times it continued to happen. After being reported. I'm done. This is pissing me off just thinking about it. Yeah, we don't really need to go too deep into this one. I'm glad that he didn't go into further detail because that is sick. Story 22. I might be too late for this to be seen, but I have one that was kind of effed up. This happened in jail, but they held sentence with non-sentence, so there were guys there doing time. Anyway, this new white dude came on the unit. There weren't a lot of white guys there, so he naturally came over. He introduced himself, said he was a barber. Okay, cool. There wasn't any white barbers, so it would be cool to get some discount cuts. I'm only bringing up race so much because it matters later, and in there, it wasn't a big deal until it was. I thought the guy was weird. He was oddly quiet and had huge, deep, long scars going up and down his arms, but he cuts hair, so whatever. Couple days go by, and I'm on my way back from church with an old-timer and a young Spanish kid. The kid is they have paperwork on the new dude, and they were going to violate him over it. He's telling me all this, and I'm like, guy, we both happen to be white, but, I don't represent that dude. If you have paperwork, show it to the guys and do whatever. I told some of the other guys and left it at that. So later that night, his cellie set him up to be in the cell, and 3 guys, white, Spanish, black, that's how they did it, I guess, to make sure everyone had a say? I honestly don't know. Went in the cell after him. They beat him bad. Really bad. He had a hole in his cheek you could see his teeth through. The guy said okay when they were done and said he had to go to the hospital. They said no, stay inside because if the cameras show them going in and him coming out effed up, They'll put it together. Guy says, no, I have to. I'm really hurt. They think on it and tell him to pretend he got hurt another way, like playing basketball or falling down the stairs. Guy says, okay. We're almost at check-in time for the night, like 5 minutes away, and I see dude come out of the cell. He has all his stuff like he's gonna shower, but has a hand towel draped over his head so you can't see his face. So already I'm on edge. 1, because I knew what happened, and 2, I knew he wasn't showering with 5 minutes left. So I'm on the bottom tier, watching him try to figure out what he's doing. He gets to the top stair and literally throws himself down the stairs. Now these stairs are all metal and they connect the first tier of stairs to the second above, so like one story. This guy catches an edge of something because he's going down the stairs end over end and his head keeps banging the stairs as he goes down. It was a weird sound. He hit the last few stairs and finished his last rotation and came down head first on the concrete floor with like the loudest smack I've heard in my life. Nobody moved. Everyone had an idea of what was going on, so only one old guy who didn't interact with us ran over to him and took one look and started yelling for the CO. The COs initially just sat in their station, and I'm watching blood just pool under this guy, like spreading out. Finally, they come check, and instantly everyone is screaming for medical and for us to get back in our cells and lock down. It happened right in front of my cell, and I saw them put him on the blackboard. They were trying to cross his hands over his chest to buckle something, but couldn't because they wouldn't stay up. In the aftermath, we learned he died. All 3 guys were pulled out and presumably charged with the beating. Life just went on as normal after. Edit. I forgot the most important part. No one ever saw his paperwork. No one had it. They just thought they didn't like him in another unit. So they essentially just beat him and killed him because they wanted to. It's just something that stuck with me, especially because I was only in there because I couldn't afford bail of $500. Sorry for being so long. Story 23. Been to prison and seen a lot, but one thing that has always stuck out to me was actually just in holding at Franklin County in Columbus, Ohio. Back when I was an addict, you would get booked downtown. You would be in a holding cell with like 20 guys in a small room waiting to go up to the cells overnight until you could be brought to the other jail. So we were all in there for about 8 to 12 hours or so. The entire time, there's a guy chained up to a bench that's made to handcuff people to. It's just on the other side of the window of the cell we were all in. They had him all tangled up and handcuffed to it. He had a spit mask on, just a mesh hood that goes over your head and covers your entire face so you cannot spit on officers. Well, randomly, officers would just walk up to him and spray mace into the mask. They did this for hours and hours. It was terrible. The kid was beyond crying. He was just a mess of vomit, snot, and blood leaking out of the mask everywhere. I have no idea what that young kid did, but it was terrible to see. He was in there the entire time I was there. During that time, we got all access, of course, to the restrooms and fed twice. It may not sound that bad on here, but I've been witness to horrible things in my time as a homeless addict, and this is one of the things that always stuck with me. Story 24. Ex-CO for 10 years here. There's a situation that stuck with me. About year 3, I was working second shift kitchen, and a guy, can't remember his name, was giving me crap. So I gave it back, and a bit of back and forth later, he took it a bit too far, and I told him I'd give him a 24 or a 48 for it if he kept going. He told me he didn't give a crap because he had court tomorrow, would get released, and couldn't wait to see his daughter. Checked the computer, and he did indeed have court. Called him into the kitchen office, and we had a chat. Essentially boiled down, I decided not to give him a write-up, and we hashed it out well enough. Next day, prior to getting in at 12 p.m. for my kitchen shift, he was found dead behind a Cumberland Farms after getting released and went to his old drug dealer. Got high. It was laced with fet. Died on the spot. Story 25. I got 2. There was this small feminine white kid that came to the unit. He was pretty nice but quiet and was immediately adopted by one of the old heads and his pet. The 3 would go around and the whole unit watched it. What started as friendly chat with the 3 started to get weird. The old head teaching the kid how things work in state, telling at him when he steps out of line. Small, odd touch, shoulder, hand, even slight petting eventually. Me and my buddy got stuck sitting with the kid one mealtime and we warned him. Smoke, the old head, is a chomo, and you fit the bill. You should get out of that. He's setting you up to sexually assault you. Little Nick, too. That was Smoke's pet. That'd never happen. You don't know what he's like. and he left and avoided us. About a week later, the CO was doing a round when smoke was posted at his own door. CO got curious, pushed his way into the cell, found Nick raping the gag kid. They'd been taking turns on him for hours, but no one noticed till the CO found out. Never seen that kid again, but that duo just did some time in the hole, then came back out like nothing happened. Smoke was a life anyways. Not sure what Nick was in for. Second one. My unit was cut in half. One side with GP and other side with a special unit with programs and crap to help inmates adjust to GP. Just a paper decoration, really. One kid there who was like 6 foot and skinny that we called Bird. Really sweet kid that probably had a learning disability, but was sweet. A lot of people there took him in and treated him good, but was also naive AF and kind of warranted the support. He had his grandma and girlfriend at home and talked to and about them all the time. Would get depressed sometimes, and we'd all pep talk him. Focus on getting out. Get back to your gram and your girl. He did wind up getting a little extorted for protection, but in the grand scheme of what you see, it was just him feeding the UM of the unit every now and then, and young'uns would get told to stay away or else. So no one batted an eye on that. But one day, Bird finally got out. Unit had a small typical good luck to you. Not many hated him, as long as you didn't tell him anything you didn't want anyone to know. He was good, like an old kid, so it was hard not to laugh at the way he was chill with him. But he got out, and we all had hopes for him. Month after he left, news was on the TV in the day room, and out popped Bird being cuffed, escorted, and a camera in his face. Him telling to get the camera out of his effing face as he was coming back. Guess he found his estranged dad effing and beating his girlfriend, and he went ballistic and bleached his face, then beat him to death, drug his body out back, and set him on fire. Kid was slow, but wasted potential. It was like watching the Pods kid fail. It bummed a lot of people out, but that's jail, I guess. Story 26. I knew an inmate who'd signed a power of attorney to his wife so she could handle his assets, business, pay for his defense, etc. A week after he sent the letter, she cashed out all his accounts and disappeared. He was also an ICE detainee, so he almost certainly was deported with nothing to his name. He was a nice guy, too. His bunkmate had a seizure one night, and he kept him stable and from falling until staff responded. Story 27. I was doing a stretch at Collins, NYS, and my cellmate kept telling me that another inmate had it out for him because he nailed his brother. I spoke with the guy. Even though I had little swing in that place, I was just sick of hearing that guy whining to the wee hours of the night. The guy straight up said he knew the dude was SEED, certified insane, and had no beef. Had a talk with him later that evening in hopes he'd calm down. Nope. He then became convinced I too was with them. He cut his own neck with a melted toothbrush, spent 2 days in a coma before they took him off life support. Even though it's sad, I don't for a minute ask myself what if, because I already went to the nines to accommodate his ass. Some people just ain't right in the head. Brief intermission here, but I don't think I've ever heard of a melted toothbrush being used as a self-unalive or murder weapon. How do you even do that in prison? So many questions. It's just more weird than it is sad, unfortunately. Story 28. I've seen everything. Murders, gang hits, self-unalives, essays, theft, gang initiations. But the saddest was, I watched a younger 34 to 40 guy that was extremely healthy have a massive stroke that he survived that left him unable to walk. Half of his body was frozen. He could comprehend talking to you, but he was unable to speak. He would try. After about a year, he was able to walk to chow by himself with a walker. It was extremely sad, and I still think about that to this day. Story 29. Lots of mentally ill people not getting the care they needed. Oddly, inmates were quite compassionate. However, I was in the pod for the folks with good behavior in short time, so everyone was kissing ass. For every 3 weeks of good behavior, you get a bonus week taken off of your sentence. Most everyone in there had 2 years or less. Most guards were nice, but there were 1 or 2 that you could tell never got past their high school bully phase. Folks like that have no business being cops in the first place. People you know that only got a badge so they could get away with their future manslaughter. Story 30. I was in juvie back in the late 70s in California. Watched a kid, like 12 or 13. No idea on age. He was just a really small kid, and we all assumed his age. Kill an older kid before lights out. The older kid had been raping the younger for a while, and he'd had enough. He managed to get a weapon. We figured from the guards, 'cause no way he made it, and got the guy from behind. We all knew something was going to happen, 'cause for weeks you could see the kid was ready to snap, and we all figured it'd be a bloodbath. for the younger guy. He got lucky in the fight and got him down, and kid was knocked out cold. Then proceeded to cut the guy's eyes out. Whole. He was like a surgeon, he was so fast about it. He'd also cut open his abdomen, so intestines were out and everything. It was gruesome. They had him committed to psych, and that was the last I saw or heard of him. But I did hear he got out, and later in life, searches showed he ended up as a rather successful lawyer. I never knew or witnessed the essay or anything sexual between the two, just lots of harassment, at all times. I don't think it'd matter much, as I had my own fears to deal with. We'll never forget seeing eyeballs for the first time. Story 31. My neighbor was locked up in juvie when he was 12 for lighting an abandoned house on fire. They were neighborhood kids that would play in the house. It was in the woods, and no one ever really went there, so they made it their fort. My friend wanted to join with them, and they said he could join their club. Not gang, these were just some little kids hanging out. And they told him he could join if he got rid of a wasp nest that was in one of the rooms. They gave him a lighter and a can of hairspray and told him to burn the nest. He didn't really want to do that, but he really wanted to be their friend, because they were a little older and basically the only other kids his age around. So he goes in and finds the wasp nest, lights the lighter, and sprays the nest, and some curtains caught fire, and eventually the whole house. When the police came, they all pointed their finger at him. While in juvie, he was sexually assaulted by one of the guards. He went in there as a kid who just wanted some friends and came out of there a criminal. He stole cars, got in fights, and was never the same again. He was in and out of jails his whole life, and he passed away last year from a very treatable infection, but he didn't get the care he needed until it was too late. The juvie system seems to just wreck kids. There has to be a better way. Whew, that is extremely sad. Kind of like the OP said, he started just as an innocent kid wanting friends, and just a sequence of unfortunate traumas turned him into an absolute psychopath. And again, I plead for the accountability of some of these CEOs and, prison workers that kind of feed into these dark tendencies. Hate it for that kid. Rest in peace, man. Story 32. Spent a few years in a juvenile prison in Florida almost 20 years ago. 15-year-old kid we called Paul Wall got to his release date, and the day he was leaving, packed everything up and sat in the day room. We wished him good crap, hugged, and then he just waited, sitting with his bag, and waited some more. The whole day went by, and we finally hit rack time, and I don't know how he didn't break down. I mean, I know he couldn't anyway, that being the environment and all, but kid was tough for that. His mom forgot to come pick him up, and she forgot for another week or so before someone finally came and got him. I honestly can't imagine how that completely shattered him mentally during those few days that probably felt like an eternity. I know he had looked at that day like the light at the end of the tunnel, like we all do, and that guarantee was shattered, and he had no idea how much longer that nightmare was going to last. It had me shook a little bit, and I'd be fronting if I said it didn't. Up to that point, I'd been under the understanding that they had to release you on your release day. Crap was crazy to think that my people might decide to not get me and I'd just be stuck. Story 33. Not a prisoner, but a CEO. But I've seen a guy who has admitted to being sexually abused as a child. Very depressed person. His girlfriend on the outside was effing another man. It was summertime, which meant we were short-staffed. So inmates had to be locked in their cells all day. 24 hours a day for like a week straight, with the thought of his girlfriend on the outside cheating on him. He was single-celled, meaning no cellmate. Just by himself. I responded and found him hanging there with his sheet wrapped around his neck. His lips were blue. He had defecated himself due to the pressure. I cut him down with a knife. I watched him have a seizure, and I tried to hold his head in a position where he wouldn't hurt himself. I watched him be taken away in an ambulance. He ended up living, but had several other self-unalive attempts since. Story 34. Not an inmate, but a correctional officer. I worked in the high security area of the unit, so dealt mostly with the crapheads and suicidal inmates, until they could get sent off to a mental health facility. Ended up watching a direct observation inmate for a couple of shifts. He was a trustee, lowest security inmate, lived outside on the perimeter fence in dorms, and drove 18-wheelers transporting stuff between the prisons while he was an inmate. He went to pass another 18-wheeler on a 2-lane highway. There ended up being an oncoming car, and he couldn't get back over into the right lane. So he swerved left off the road, but the oncoming car did too. Hit her head on and killed the woman that was driving. I don't remember his original charge or if he caught additional charges for the crash, but talking to him for a couple of 8-hour shifts was interesting to say the least. I don't know how to explain how effed up he was over it. Story 35. My cellmate in juvie was in for statutory SA at 15. Girl was 3 months younger than him. More had to do as he was from the trailer park and her father was on the city council. Anyway, someone he knew got busted and came in, and apparently his girlfriend had self-unalived herself 2 months back, and no one had let him know. Later in the cell, he just got up and proceeded to split his skull open by bashing his head on the cement walls in bed. I ended up getting put back to a green shirt because I was trying to restrain him while yelling for help. Guards took forever to even check. Never even knew what happened to him after that. I knew his name was Shane, but no last name. This was in the late 80s, and I was 13 at the time. Story 36. I worked in prisons a bit, helping young convicts upskill pending release. One guy, maybe 20 years old, very eloquent, smart, and funny, got busted smuggling drugs at the airport. He walked out of the airport with no problem, then realized he'd dropped his sunglasses, so he went back in. Got caught by a sniffer dog. Obviously, I'm not condoning anything he did, but for a smart guy, he knew how stupid he'd been going back in for a pair of sunglasses. The look in his eyes when he told me was kinda sad. I think he got about 6 years. Yeah, OP said it best. For a smart guy, you sure are a dumbass. Just get another pair of sunglasses. They're like $10 at a gas station. Or if you're really bougie, $200. Either way, not worth 6 years in prison. Story 37. I made friends with this girl in jail one time, and we talked every day for the week I was there. She always told me I wasn't meant to be there. My ex was a federal attorney and slapped me with breaking a restraining order because he was tried for attempted murder against me, and I ran into him outside of a courtroom, as if I tried, but I never asked why she was. Found out later in a post on the Colorado Gazette that she was found guilty of stabbing, shooting, and throwing fatal blows on the 11-year-old stepchild. Edit, because I got the story a little wrong. It was a few years ago, and I didn't find out until after, so I think I was in such shock that anything anyone told me stuck. I even gave her a great book I found in there when I left, so she had something to read. Really liked her, and so did most of the staff and inmates. Still in disbelief. Story 38. Sweet old guy. Cuban. Sweet unless you talk trash about Castro. Bottom tier. Collapses in the day room behind our table where we're playing Proxy Magic: The Gathering. My back is to him and I don't see anything. Another at the table sees it. Says nothing for like 30 seconds after. Another inmate wanders by and nervous laughs and asks the old guy why he's lying on the ground. Dude is entirely unresponsive, but the rest of the table turns around. We shout for the guard to come save this fellow. Day room is closed and we return to cell. Next 20 minutes, all you can hear is the guards talking and some sort of machine going. Compress, 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 and so on. Eventually, he is taken off. The day room goes back to normal. Come to find him back in a week, walking and talking. Apparently, this wasn't the first time. The guy who said nothing? That's the sad crap. Banned from the table. Eventually moved unit since everyone blacklisted him. I don't know why, this is just hilarious. It's like you didn't say anything, so you don't get to play Magic: The Gathering with us anymore. In jail. Hilarious. Story 39. Not prison, but when I was jail, awaiting transfer to a new facility, there was a girl in my pod who'd had colostomy, except medical either didn't have or wouldn't give her the bags and carrier strips she needed, so she would stuff the stoma with pads and toilet paper. I was also part of the TTI, unfortunately. We were all 14 to 18 at the time of these stories, which all took place at the same facility. Staff was notorious dirty restraints. They'd make sure they would hurt us. Once I got beat in the head with a walkie and my head stepped on. They'd use 5 staff to restrain kids when it definitely wasn't needed. One day we were in science class and one of the girls, Q, started panicking. She wanted the F out and she wanted out now. She wasn't really aggressive at all, but she did try moving stuff out of the way and pulling on the door handle. The dirty female dog, Miss Z, chicken winged her. That's when you pull someone's bent arm behind their back and push it up. But she pushed Q's arm up to the point that it broke. It was an audible break and I gagged. We all silently panicked because if we freaked out, it would be considered a riot. Q. Her scream was the first time I've heard someone sound like an animal. Oh my God! You broke my arm! My arm! You broke my effing arm! That crap was dangling there and she just could not stop screaming. Miss Z radioed for backup. They escorted us back to our cells while they took Q to the hospital. Miss Z stayed on staff but couldn't work with our group, or the other once Q got transferred. There was a guy who was a day away from release. I honestly think he was scared of the outs and didn't know what to do. Being institutionalized is its own kind of hell. Anyway, our room/cells and beds were being remodeled, and he took a piece of metal that was left behind by a construction worker and stabbed a staff member. Got transferred to jail and was looking at prison time for my understanding. It sticks with me because I was also scared to leave. Like I said, being institutionalized is really its own kind of hell, but goddamn. There was a kid called Chop. I think he had some kind of developmental disability, honestly, but he was sexually aggressive, like masturbating in the group rooms and flashing anyone who went by. Anyway, there was this really young therapist working there, and I don't know exactly what happened because he was on the boys' floor, but I do know that he sexually assaulted her and she left the same day and never came back. There was also a girl who was new and didn't want to be there, so she would do anything she could to leave. That wasn't uncommon because some people wanted to be on the outs, so they would hurt themselves to have to go to the hospital. This girl would swallow everything she could find that was small, but most commonly batteries on a regular basis. At one point, the staff ignored her to the point that she was throwing up blood. There's also the fact that in that same facility, we had to routinely watch one another for self-harm, self-unalive attempts, or perform restraints. There were times when I would have to stay up for hours to watch my roommate to make sure they didn't kill themselves. Staff did not care. There's more than one occasion where we had roomies attempt. Hell, I even attempted and had to be restrained once. God, it was horrendous. On one occasion, I had two roommates, C and S. S was suicidal, so C and I had to stay up in shifts, in a sort of self-unalive watch. We were both heavily medicated, so eventually we both dozed off. Later, I woke up to C screaming for help because S had attempted. She was trying to help S whole. I banged on the cell door for help. I screamed and banged on the door, which was metal and old, so it rattled loudly. I screamed that S had attempted, to please come help. Other girls on the floor also woke up and were banging on the doors, telling staff that they needed to stop effing around. The Midnights ignored us and kept laughing, playing their music for some time until they came and helped. Told S to settle and left. I guess S lost her will to fight because she didn't try again. Story 40. My stepfather was in prison for 8 years in Florida for vehicular manslaughter. He said there was this older guy he knew that had been in there for a few years. Apparently he was a really nice guy and minded his own business. This guy was released, and he didn't see him again until a few months later when we ran into him. He asked why the hell he was back in prison, and the old guy said he didn't know how to really do anything. He said he couldn't get an apartment or a job due to his prison time, and was essentially living on the street since he didn't really have family. So he stole a few things from a store, made a big show of it, then stole a lady's purse on the way out. Then he just sat in a park and waited on the police to show up and arrest him. He literally couldn't function without prison. So he decided to get himself locked back up so he could at least have 3 hots and a cot. Ever since then, I can't help but think about how effed up that is. Story 41. Not prison, but county. I got an OMVI when I was 19. Had to do 10 days in county. It was pretty crappy because there were 50 of us in a room that only had 30 beds. Everyone is supposed to be non-violent offenders. There was a guy that was in for child support. Decent enough guy in his 40s, but you could kind of tell he did some crap when he was younger. Anyway, on the 6th day, this guy gets in our pod, and you can immediately tell something is up because his whole demeanor changed. Asked what was said, they were in a gang as kids, but that's it. 2 days pass, and everyone there knows something is up. Wake up to them going at it, beating the crap out of each other. Guy ends up gouging the cool guy's eye out for some crap that was at least 20 years old. Story 42. I saw a black guy turn white. He had overdosed on heroin. This was particularly shocking because I saw him walk into a dorm with his normal skin tone. A few minutes later, someone carried his limp body out of the bathroom, and he was grayish white. A few people on the dorm tried to help him. They slapped him and injected him with a saltwater solution, among other things. When they realized nothing was working, they opened the door and threw him into the hall. The correctional officers found him and were able to save him. 2 days later, I saw him at breakfast, and he was high again. So high, he had nodded out with both hands in his oatmeal. Story 43. In the UK, prisons are in no way, shape, or form as bad as prisons in the US. Everyone pretty much just wants to get their heads down, do their time, and get out. None of the violence, hierarchy, etc. There are definitely people that will take advantage of someone in a heartbeat, though. Just for the kicks. A guy was transferred from a mental institution to a general prison. He absolutely, categorically should not have been there. He had severe learning disabilities and some physical handicaps. In his first few weeks, a couple of younger guys started taking advantage of him, bullying him, and eventually sexually assaulted him, routinely, every night for weeks. When it was discovered what was happening, he was transferred to a safer institution. Reports of what happened were, somehow, mysteriously circulated throughout the jail, and unfortunately, their transfer took quite a long time. I don't think they enjoyed themselves when everyone found out. Eventually, they were transferred to another prison. It's just a damn shame that cons have access to telephones, and they ended up on protection after another few beatings. Story 44. Not as an inmate, but as a CO, I saw a kid get killed, and it stayed with me. Young guy was fresh meat and caught the eye of an old-timer. Well, I guess the kid was tired of getting SA'd, so he went after the old dude one day with a blade he snuck back from his job at a t-shirt silk screen shop. It looked like he got a couple good swings on the old-timer before he got the weapon away from him, but that's about it. Old-timer got the blade and damn near took the kid's head off before we got there. Kid was dead before they even started working on him. I'll never forget seeing them take the kid away with his head rolling around, barely attached to his body, like that he couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. Story 45. Not a prisoner, but as a CO, I used to work at a hospital detail where inmates from across the state would come for treatment. I was assigned to work in the hospital for staffing, covering watching them while they were there. Had an inmate come in with a cancer relapse and was talking with him. He had cancer 1.5 years ago and had gotten it out and had treatment, but the state failed to get him back in to see if they had completely gotten it or if he needed more radiation. Finally, after fighting with medical at his facility for a year, they sent him back to the doctor. Tests showed that his cancer had come back, was still there, and had spread from the original area. Felt bad for him being trapped there, not being able to get what he needed for treatment. Yes, do the crime, do the time, but he was a non-violent, low-level offender. Not that it should matter, but let's face it, it does. Story 46. Not a prisoner, but my brother got sent to a high-security mental facility for murdering my best friend. He beat him to death in an episode of psychosis and schizophrenia. I found his body 3 years ago in my basement. Weed triggered a latent form of schizophrenia in him. I love my brother, but I can't forgive him ever for that. He was stubborn and didn't want to take his medication because he thought it would hinder his special powers. He couldn't remember the crazy crap he would do off his meds. It was pride, too. If he took the meds, he figured that everyone would label him as crazy. Yet the irony of it is he didn't take the medication, and the result of that was he had a severe episode. He was insane for not taking his meds. I lost 2 brothers in one single day. What's sad for him is that he believes he'll get out. He's making plans and has dreams that he believes will come to fruition. No one in my family has the gall to tell that he won't. They don't want to crush his hope. He's in his late 20s, but he'll be in there forever. He doesn't take his meds in the facility either, so they deem him unfit to return to society. Story 47. Not prison, but jail. Someone was convinced to take a bet for 100 ramen noodles to eat a bar of soap and keep it down for 15 minutes. He ate that Irish Springs like it was an ice cream sandwich, ended up puking and not getting another inmate. And me took a collection for him because they refused to pay on the grounds he threw up. The guards found out and put him in ISO for the night to make sure he wouldn't die. He was okay though. We had a shower crappier that same day we paid a guy to lick the shower drain. Also, snorting coffee and the funny or chili ramen packs are common in my hometown jail too. Okay, so me, after reading this and trying to provide narration and context, I still have no clue what this guy's talking about. Listeners, do you? Let's hear it in the comments. Story 48. I was on probation for a weed possession charge. I pissed dirty one time and had to do 30 days in county. Luckily, I was able to get on the road work crew, standing on the shoulder, spinning a sign that said stop on one side and slow on the other. Anyway, we were coming back in at the end of the day, lining up to squat and cough when one of the COs brought a guy from Gen Pop and put him alone in a drunk tank. Padded room, one window with blinds, operated from the outside, obviously, and the blinds were closed. So dude was in there alone and couldn't see anything outside of the room. So I'm in line a few minutes, and this sheriff's deputy, who was obviously on the task force, storms in from outside and shouts, "Where is he?" The CO points to the drunk tank, and Deputy Dickhead confirms, "Derek?" CO nods and Dee continues to storm over, snatches the door open, and slams it behind him. I couldn't make out what was said, but Dee yells a question, followed by an aggressive, "Huh?" I couldn't hear if there was an answer back to him, But then I heard a loud pop, followed by loud clicking. Then nothing. Door opens. Dee Dee walks out of the drunk tank and back out of the jail. That was it. A few of us inmates kind of looked around at each other like, WTF? But none of the COs flinched, and my turn to squat and cough was coming up. I never heard anything about it again. Not from other inmates or COs. I don't know what Derek did, or what he was in for. But they brought that guy to a room away from cameras and prying eyes just so that Deputy could tase the crap out of him. Roll Tide, as they say. Story 49. Went to a federal prison that is known for not just brutal actions, but lack of control for a short time. Was sitting with other inmates at the time that I had just met, but had been there for some time. We saw a bus unload of new students, and one spoke that the guy just stepping off was a Como. I knew what these meant from other experiences, but the way they all looked at him at this specific prison, and the way that they said it, was almost remorseful. Knowing what was bound to happen, it was surreal, and that inmate was dead 2 days later. Made my whole experience there very real and very spooky. Story 50. Not an ex-convict, but worked nights in a maximum security 2250 prison as a corrections officer. One night, we heard a loud commotion from inmates banging on their doors and pressing buttons to speak to the person in the picket, the officer who controls the doors. Ran in to find a guy beaten to crap, face extremely swollen, and couldn't even recognize him. They end up assigning me to hospital duty with him, so I jump in the ambulance with him when they show up. We get to the hospital, and I start filling out the paperwork on him for his watch stuff and activity, and realize it was this chill, goofy inmate we would always talk crap back and forth in good fun. Couldn't even tell because he was beaten nearly to death. Skip ahead to the next day or two, and I ask around about what happened, and find out it was domestic violence. The wing heard them getting into it because a cellmate wanted him to keep sucking him off, and he didn't want to. Other inmates that hear this clown him for it, and so the cellie ends up beating the crap out of this guy to try to cover it up. Like this guy was trying to force himself onto him because he didn't want everyone thinking that he was a punk. Gay. The inmates only informed me of the smaller details because they know I wasn't going to go around bringing it up to rank, as it was irrelevant to how punishments work for fights. Inmate in the hospital even wanted me to tell his cellie that he didn't hate him or blame him for it, or whatever. Story 51. Wasn't in jail, but worked at a state prison. Saddest thing I remember was an inmate that was my age, about 24 at the time, and he looked like he was 90. He had major kidney failure, and they were going to let him out on a medical release, meaning you were going to die in the next 6 months and were non-violent. He said he was supposed to get out the week before, but his paperwork was messed up. I see him a month later. Paperwork is still bad. Then he dies. Found out that you had to have addresses of multiple family members for the medical discharge, and the family has to sign off that he will stay out of trouble. They didn't want anything to do with him, so they refused all paperwork. He was in for car theft. Story 52. A guy I grew up with, last name Slade, was in a cell block I got out into. He had shot and killed his stepfather that had means and connections that took his kid from him. Granted, IDK if it was justified or not, but after he shot him, he drug him through the woods and tried to throw the body down an abandoned well. What is sad is, I found out later during the time, IDK where he was or what he was up to, a friend of his was playing with a gun and shot him on the head, and he had survived, but was definitely affected in his mental state. But he didn't know, so he had no idea why people treated him the way he did. He didn't remember anything but waking up on the hospital and didn't remember the last 6 months before the headshot. So he had a loose grip on reality and was genuinely a nice guy and was good as gold before the accident. He grew up in a great family, had good business, he dug graves for a living. He did it by hand until he could afford a machine. He had a great brother, mentor, and father. Story 53. Not in prison, but I worked at a homeless shelter for a bit. We had a wont for mentally ill veterans with crippling PTSD. There was one guy who always looked up and waved at me when I came in, almost as if he knew me. Maybe I looked like a fallen comrade. After waving, he'd go back to staring at the floor, fists clenched and mumbling to himself. He disappeared for a few weeks, and when I asked the receptionist what happened, she told me he'd gone outside and attacked one of the black kids. Being a very Democrat-leaning city in the southern U.S., the DA railroaded the guy as part of their war on racism. I'm not sure what happened after he went to prison, but I can assure you he needed a mental hospital, not a corrections facility. Story 54. My sister's ex-boyfriend shared a story with me. When he was in jail, he made some friends, and the closest ones were 2 brothers. They, just like him, grew up without a father, and they clicked on so many levels. The brothers were drug users and served their time for selling. They all served time together, and many times he and two brothers spoke about their life after jail, that they wanted to get a better life. They all had hopes, nothing super fancy. The guys wanted to become truck drivers, have families, do better, have their own kids. They had just these simple dreams to have a good life, never take any drugs again, get jobs as drivers. They were so hopeful for a new, better future when they left jail in a few months before my sister's ex. When he got out of jail, he called them right away, all excited, and they both were on drugs. Story 55. Not really sad because this MFer deserved it, but I was in a place they send you before you go to prison where they figure out your security level and where you're going to go, so basically you're with everyone from level 1 to level 4. On the tier I was on, there was a deaf inmate who walked up and down the aisle a couple of times a day, passing out water and crap. I guess his bunkie went through his crap since Buddy couldn't talk and Bunkie didn't know how to sign and found his paperwork and that he was there for raping an 8-year-old. Well, his bunkie beat the crap out of him while we were locked down, and the next morning when they let us out for breakfast, 4 to 5 guys trapped him against the security door at the back of the tier and just dog-walked this MFer for a good 5 to 7 minutes, since the guards couldn't see because there were so many of us it blocked their view. When we came back, all you could see was the extreme amount of blood on the floor, to the point it was falling under the rail to the main floor 4 levels down. Story 56. My father and one of my stepmoms have been to prison and jail. My stepmom has one of the more crazy experiences. She had a cellmate that was a younger, really sweet girl. My stepmom was in for an extensive drug charge. Not sure of the other girl's charge. Said she became friends with the girl and that they would eat together and whatever. Well, one day when it was shower time and my stepmom was checking out a razor to shave, and apparently she walked up on the girl in the shower and she'd used the blade to form a razor to cut a 2 to 3 inch deep long gash across her stomach. My stepmom said she just froze and then ran to grab a guard, and they took her to the hospital. She never understood why she did it or what for. She said she was just sitting on the ground of the shower and smiling. Gives me major goosebumps. Story 57. Met a guy called Earl. He'd been in prison for admitting to committing lots of crimes, so his wife Joy didn't get in trouble for stealing a truck. It turns out Earl was an ex-criminal with a list of things he wanted to fix after he, a few years prior, had won the lottery and then got run over and lost his winning card. He is still trying to finish that list, fixing every wrong he'd done and trying to become a better person, even in such dire circumstances. What a man. Story 58. I was a CO once upon a time in a max and state prison. I have a bunch of stories. People being stabbed over a makeshift cigarette, another being stabbed over a honey bun, one kid being beaten to death for not siding with a gang, another kid getting SA'd and turned into a communal prison wife by the outcast gang because he didn't have protection from another gang. The saddest for me personally was a big dude that we locked up in confinement. The reason for this? He stabbed his daughter's murderer and rapist, who was locked up in another dorm during yard time when both dorms shared that yard. Blood everywhere. Screams of anger and years of anguish all pouring out of this man within moments. The sheer misery I saw firsthand get unleashed onto Akomo's face. The guy died from the beating, and his head was smashed in, neck and chest full of wounds. I miss being a CO sometimes, but then I remember days like that. Story 59. I was in a prison in England, and I watched and tried to help as an 18-year-old literally had a complete and utter mental breakdown before me. He was involved in county lines drug trafficking in London. He was a mule for a gang. He had been in prison on and off for over a year apparently. I spoke to him out on exercise on my first full day in prison. I had a relatively normal conversation about where I used to work, how long I was in for, etc. After that exercise period, an officer came to my cell when everyone had been locked up. She told me that I was the first person he had spoken to in about 2 months. A day later, one of the other inmates came to my cell door during association time and told me that I needed to come out and, quote, sort him out, else someone was going to hurt him. What was happening quickly made me realize that this young man was in a downward spiral like I had never witnessed. He was walking around the upper level with a Bible upside down in his hands, reciting it. It was soaking wet. His clothes were damp also. He was walking in and out of the shower room, going to the shower fully clothed, coming out soaking wet, asking people if they had any clothes he could wear, or for soap, or a razor, going back in and out, so on, so forth. I tried to stop him, to get his attention, and I called him by name. He stopped, looking at me, completely blank in the face, dead-eyed and nothing behind them. The man that I walked around with the day before was gone, completely and utterly destroyed. The men around him were standing, laughing, imitating his movement, with a severe lack of empathy. One of them said, quote, "Why is he so autistic?" I replied, "Don't be foolish. He's literally having a mental breakdown before our eyes." That very afternoon, he was moved off of the wing and sent to the hospital. I did see him again, around 3 months later, at the prison church. He was mute and vacant, but he was able to have basic cognitive interactions. Seeing that happen to an 18-year-old was barely have the words. Story 60. I spent a decade of my life in prison. It was not easy. In fact, every day in that place was a constant fight for survival. One night, just after turning off the lights, I heard a whisper through the walls. "Tonight, in the backyard," they said. I didn't pay much attention to it at first, but later the screams and the sound of banging woke me up. 2 rival gangs were facing off in a brutal fight for control of contraband inside the prison. The guards intervened, but not before several men were seriously injured. Story 61. My pop spent 21 years in a maximum security prison. He's a big guy, 6'6", and covered head to toe in gang and racist tattoos and scars. I was 10 the first time I met him. I had to remove my shoes and get patted down before entering the visiting area, a large room that looked a lot like a school cafeteria. I've never met this person, never seen a photo. My mom's side of the family never talked about him. I knew nothing about him. It went from asking who and where he was, to meeting my 3 new aunts, and now this moment. He appeared dismissive of me, like he didn't care at all that I was there. Before I could process what he was saying, he stood up and dove over to an inmate at a table across from us and began beating him. Headbutting, hands clubbed together, beating him. I still remember the sounds. Guards swarmed as instantly as it all happened, but it didn't matter. He earned 6 more years off that act. I was there with my aunts the day he got released. He walked out those giant gates carrying nothing and never looked back once. Story 62. First time in county jail about 6 years ago. I get to the holding cell and it's just a 10 by 10 room with painted cinder block walls and 4 benches spread out amongst the room, with a toilet furnished maybe 3 feet in front of the cell door. Dude named Bentley, possibly mid to late 30s, sitting alone on one of the benches, gooked out his gourd on heroin. He was half conscious, muttering to himself, his head swaying from side to side as his eyes closed all the time. He was in there for possession or a probation violation, I'm assuming, but maybe 10 to 25 minutes after I sat down, he pulled out a bag from his tube socks, filled with a brown powder. He walks over to the toilet sink and puts a bit of water in it. He then flicks the bag about 10 times until the light brown powder becomes a nearly black liquid, then snorts it. Off he goes, in and out of consciousness for the next 6 hours. Occasionally, he would chime in on a conversation that was taking place, or grunt real loudly, but dude was just laying there for hours. I've never seen anything else like that, and I never seen or heard anything from him again when I got out. Oh, and my first day at the open air DC, as I walked from booking into my cell block, literally as we were being assigned bunks, I see one random inmate walk up to another inmate sitting down watching TV and beat the brakes off of him until a CO pulled him off. That was wild. F County Jail. Story 63. One time when I was getting released from county, a guy in the isolation holding cell had smeared his crap all over the walls and floor of the cell, and the officers made a deal with him that if he cleaned up the crap, he could get a shower and a meal tray. So after about an hour of him arguing about it, he eventually agreed and they brought him a mop. It took him about 45 minutes to get the cell clean enough to satisfy the officers, and when they opened the cell, they took the mop bucket from him and literally walked his crappy-ass mop bucket down to the general population holding cell and popped the door and handed an inmate the mop, and he proceeded to mop their floor with this crappy effing mop. And within a minute or so, everyone on the floor was freaking out and yelling about the smell that was just wiped across the whole floor. A few minutes later, I was released, and who knows what happened after. Story 64. I went to prison at 21, and about a year and a half into my sentence, I got into some trouble at the unit I was at, so I got shipped to a maximum security ID unit. So at 23, with a 6-year sentence, I went somewhere where everyone was doing big, aggravated numbers or letters. Anyways, I ended up beating the case I caught at the other unit, so my custody status dropped. And so I was able to move into the dorms where there's a little more freedom. About a month after I get into the dorms, I wake up to the most terrifying scream I've ever heard in my life, and jumping up to find out what was happening. Turns out, someone boiled water in a modified hot pot and dumped a tub of petroleum jelly in the boiling water and threw it on a guy who was sleeping, all in his face. I didn't see the actual event happening because I was asleep, but I did see when they brought the guy out. It was a black man whose skin had almost melted off and turned pink. I will never forget those screams or the picture of that man's face.